You smell that? That wretched, odious smell? That is the stench of another film adaptation of a young adult franchise that has been celebrated for years, plummeting into the depths of cinematic obscurity. Whereas a multi-million-dollar franchise takes a series of beloved novels that fans have gravitated towards for more than a decade, only to obliterate the characters, the setting, the lore, the storytelling, and anything and everything that made the books so investing and charming and still being sold at bookstores to this very day. But for today, I'm not going to be talking about the ones that I find overrated or repugnantly generic as the YA romance novels or the Hunger Games and its inferior clones. I, of course, am talking about adaptations that are within the realm of the fantasy YA genre, such as the unfaithful and tedious Aragon, Percy Jackson, and even 3 years ago with The Dark Tower, where it tries to cram all 7 books into one feature film in a singularly rushed and horrifically written plot into a 95-minute running time, as well as just being a terrible movie all on its own. This latest example of a film production empire bringing a franchise of beloved novels into the big screen, or in this case streaming on Disney+, is the Artemis Fowl series written by Irish author Eoin Colfer. I'm not even going to pretend if I pronounced the first name correctly. In which you follow the main title character, a 12-year-old prodigy engaging in criminal activities within the fantasy world filled with make-believe creatures like fairies, dwarves, goblins, trolls, and so on. And as the author described it, it's Die Hard with fairies, but the main character is Hans Gruber. It was an imaginative and innovative concept and a breath of fresh air in the YA genre, and it's what made those books successful in the first place. But I gotta tell ya, if you are a fan of these books, prepare to treat this movie like a Salem witch trials victim, because this Artemis Fowl movie is not only an insultingly bare bones and sickeningly sloppy adaptation, but as a movie all on its own, it's freaking trash. But hey, before the fan base grabs its pitchforks and torches and burns it at the stake, let's give this movie its day in court and let's talk about the plot. What was the plot again? Oh, wait a minute, I just realized. This movie barely has a freaking story! But I guess we have to talk about the premise then. Even if its premise is pretty crap as it is. Ferdia Shaw plays Artemis Fowl Jr., a 12-year-old criminal mastermind. We'll talk about that later. And the son of Artemis Fowl Sr., played by Colin Farrell, a man who engages in some of the most infamous heists in human history, and even within the fantasy world of Haven City, a world organized and populated by all the magical creatures that you can think of. However, after a day has gone by, Artemis Jr. realizes that his own father has been taken hostage by a cloaked villain named Opal Killboy, who will grant his father's freedom if Artemis gives in exchange a MacGuffin known as the Aculos. And so, with the help of Holly Short, a young aspiring elven reconnaissance officer played by Laura McDonnell, and Josh Gad, who plays Mulch Diggums, a giant dwarven thief, you must gain access to the Aculos before time runs out. Now, before I continue forward, I'm going into this movie with the perspective of someone who hasn't even read any of the books. However, I have done a little bit of research before I went in to watch this movie, so take that for what it's worth. From what I heard, this movie was supposed to play as a direct adaptation of the first 2 novels. But if that was the case, they completely missed the mark on that assessment. As stated previously, the plot is downright incorporeal. This movie is just a series of miscellaneous and cliched events, as it shifts from our main character's path of rescuing his father to the fairy world of Haven City, where we are transferred to Holly Short's subplot of being one of the best leprechauns in the force. Yeah, that is the actual title of the fairy police force. Which, as it turns out, is much more interesting plot-wise than anything that has to do with the title character. But even that plot line is still poorly written, might I add. What's more insulting to the audience is that this whole plot is composed of nothing but confusing and sporadic exposition. For instance, we spend an agonizing 7 to 10 minutes of Josh Gad narrating Artemis's character, his personal interests, his backstory, his achievements, his history with his dad, every single personality trait, the entire fairy world of Haven City, and even every single character in the movie and what they're about. Seriously, this whole movie is dependent on this expository narration that I was waiting for Josh Gad to follow up his narration with. It began with 2 sisters, one born with power, the other born powerless. And if you're not an avid reader of this franchise, you'll be totally desensitized about how anything works in this movie's mythology, because this movie either explains so little or doesn't explain enough that the rules and the equipment that Artemis Fowl and the fairy police utilizes make no sense. For example, the leprechauns use something called a time freeze, which basically stops all motion inside the circumference of a bubble, and the fairies wipe all of the memories a la Men in Black style from seeing their existence. However, the next time they use the time freeze bubble, it surrounds the entire Fowl Manor, but everything outside of the bubble is frozen in place. So, which is it? Does it do it both ways? And if not, then how in the heck does the time stop work? If anyone has read the books, please explain it to me, because I have no idea if this movie even explains the entire concept of it in its entirety. But hey, whenever you don't have expository dialogue, you would get some that is downright eye-rollingly cringe-inducing and unbearable. From incredibly goofy lines like, "You spy or you die," to the eternal forehead slapper, "Get the four-leaf clover out of here." It was one of the pieces of dialogue that the minute Judi Dench said that sentence, I literally had to pause the movie and say, "Really, movie? Really? This is the caliber of writing we have?" And need I remind you that this dialogue or this entire script was written by an Irish playwright and the guy who wrote Paddington. Just to let you guys know. Also, I don't know about you, but these characters who are supposed to inhabit the charm and personality of the ones that are in the book pale in comparison for what is on screen. The reason being is because they are one-dimensional, their character development is unearned and makes little to no sense, and all of what happens to them, and even the characters themselves, deviate from the original source material. First and foremost, Artemis Fowl is not the Bond villain that you expect out of this movie that you loved from the books. Now, from what I heard, the main reason being for this is that Kenneth Branagh, the director, and Disney themselves have stated that mainstream audiences and children cannot handle a 12-year-old criminal genius. Are you serious? The entire point as to why these books are successful was simply because he was a criminal mastermind, and the audience's sense of intrigue of what it felt like to be in the shoes of a villainous protagonist. But Artemis Fowl in this movie does nothing that would categorize him as being a criminal mastermind, aside from him holding Holly Short captive for ransom, which is the closest thing in this movie that is even consistent with this main character. But even that aspect gets ruined, because as the film progresses, he's much more considerate, compromising, and eventually makes friends with Holly Short over the course of like 8 minutes because they finally reach common ground because of certain stories that they have with their fathers. However, in this movie you realize that not only are these characters not given enough time with each other to make their character development genuine or justified, they start off hating and despising each other, but by the time they eventually become friends at the third act, it's rushed, unsatisfying, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Even emotional elements that apply to his character, like his relationship with his mother, is completely absent, as it is explained in this movie that her mother died off screen. Are you angry yet? Because we haven't even reached the tip of the iceberg on that. The villain, Opal Cowboy, despite being the literal opposite of the character in the books, is a vaguely cloaked caricature. And there's really nothing else I can say about this villain, because there's really nothing to this villain aside from being shrouded in a cloaked outfit and having a distorted voice that sounds like if Gollum and Alvin and the Chipmunks had a child that was born with progeria. But in the acting department, it has so much to be desired, as it ranges from awfully wooden to outright ridiculous. Portia Shaw as Artemis Fowl is terribly stiff. Look, I recognize that this movie is his actual acting debut, but he's just not good in this movie at all. His line delivery is conveyed with little to zero emotion or conviction, as it feels like a table read whenever he's projecting lines to his father, to the fairy members, or even to his own therapist. And he barely has even a semblance of charisma or gravitas that makes his character likable or even relatable and bearable to witness. I don't usually like to make fun of or even tarnish child actors because they're young, they really don't deserve so much cruelty, but seriously, this guy needs some acting lessons. Stat. Judi Dench being in this movie as the one-dimensional, standard, gender-reversed Commander Root is just on the side of embarrassingly bizarre. I have no idea why Kenneth Branagh decided that the best possible course of direction for Judi Dench's Commander Root is to have her have a raspy smoker voice. And what is it with Judi Dench playing gender-reversed characters exactly? First she plays a transsexual cat in Cats, and now this? Come on, you're better than this. Josh Gad's character as Mulch Dickens is like a hybrid between Hagrid and Star-Lord, where he has a very gritty voice informing the audience with all of this exposition, and in other scenes he's cracking jokes, making fun of Judi Dench's character for looking like David Bowie, and listening to a Walkman while Foreigner's I Wanna Know What Love Is playing. He also has a running gag in the movie where he's being constantly discriminated by his small dwarven brethren because he's a big giant dwarf. How subtle, Disney. But on the acting side, Josh Gad's acting is super inconsistent, because at first he would shift from acting like Hagrid, as I stated before, with this very raspy Scottish accent, and then in other scenes he would start sounding like regular old Josh Gad with his super high-pitched voice. Colin Farrell is totally wasted in a role that is basically superficial for any adult actor to easily play him, because he spends the entire film either detained by the villain or having a shallow bonding experience with his own son. The only tolerable performance in this movie is Lara McDonnell as Holly Short. She's basically the sole actress who injects the right amount of personality and emotion to her performance, which makes it even more piteous because the direction of her character is totally random and sporadic. And here's where I also draw my research. Holly is said to be the only female officer in the Lower Elements Police Department, which is odd because throughout the film you start to notice that there are other female officers, and that the police force is run by a female, who is essentially the gendered reverse of the original character. If only she was the only female of the police department, she would be much more relatable and her motivations would be much more understandable. What I find most distracting is how little effort that is put into the CGI. While visual effects usually are supposed to put you into the world and create imaginative worlds and characters that are beyond your wildest dreams, the visual effects in this movie are downright ugly looking and uncompelling. There is a troll in this movie that the characters come into contact with from the beginning of the movie and even towards the final act of the film, and it's atrocious. It has a hideous design, and even the compositing when the creature is interacting with certain environments in the area, whether it's the house or even at a wedding, looks totally unconvincing, having like an uncanny valley feel. And even parts where Mulch Dickens is adjusting his jaw to dig through the ground looks not only cartoonish like something out of Son of the Mask, but dang near terrifying. The world of Haven City can be visually acceptable, but it's also incredibly distracting and noticeable whenever actors are standing right next to a blue screen in obvious effect. There was a scene where Holly Short and Commander Root are having a conversation with one another outside of Haven City, and you can see the green screen fuzz around their heads. It's horrible. All three action scenes are about as staged and cliched and generic as they can possibly be, with horrible camera movement, trying to make something stylish out of something like a James Wan movie like Aquaman, especially in the scene where Artemis and his butler are fighting a bunch of small little police elves while they're trying to siege at his manor. But the use of slow motion in this movie is freaking dreadful. I kid you not, this is actually in the movie. There is a scene in which a person is pushing a lever and the movie goes into this choppy, frame-by-frame slow motion. And the slow motion effect happens again in the climax whenever the Oculus is activating its powers. It is so horrible that literally, as I was watching this on my phone, I thought my phone lagged from internet connection, or was buffering. That's how bad it is. And just when you thought that this movie couldn't jump over the shark any higher, instead of creating a well-written story all on its own or paying respect to the original source material, this movie creates the biggest colossal mistake of its life at sequel baiting itself. Where we have our main characters ride up into the sunset saying, "We have unfinished business." No, Artemis, you're not. I mean, with a $125 million budget, you can kiss all those sequels goodbye. At the end of the day, guys, Artemis Fowl is an adaptation that shares something in common with the outcome of the classic story of Icarus. It flown way too high to the sun, and it crashed way down to the ocean below. So much promise in a potentially promising and profitable franchise is wasted on shoddy directing, unbearable effects, lifeless characters, an inconsistent narrative, an insultingly banal narrative, and unhonorably disregarding everything that made the books so wonderful, and the entire point of their success is disgraceful. One of the worst young adult adaptations of all time, and an absolute failure of Tom Hooper's Cat's proportions. If there's anything salvageable after watching this movie, it makes you want to see how good the books are in reality, and that is never a bad thing. Alright guys, so that was my review of Artemis Fowl. If you like what you see here, please like and comment below what you thought of the film yourself. You'll also find me on media outlets such as Facebook, Twitter, and if you have a phone, possibly find me on Instagram. And as always, if you'd like to see more reviews like this, be sure to subscribe for more. Alright Artemis Fowl fans, my time is up. He's all yours. My name is Nukem. And you, my friends, have been blown away.